We all love to be right, but what do we do when we're wrong? Well, it turns out Dale Carnegie gave us some good advice almost 100 years ago. Today, why Dale Carnegie was right about what to do when you're wrong. This is Coaching for Leaders, episode 112.
Produced by Innovate Learning, maximizing human potential.
Greetings to you from Orange County, California. This is Coaching for Leaders, and I'm your host, Dale Stachowiak. This is a weekly coaching show to help people be better leaders through improved communications, human relations, and personal productivity, the people side of business. And today we're tackling something that is true for just about all of us. Occasionally we're wrong, and what are we supposed to do when we're wrong? And since this is such an important topic, I brought in someone that I have never wronged, ever. And that is Bonni Stachowiak.
I see. And also we joked that since I am wrong so much, it just seemed appropriate that I would be here.
Expert guest.
Oh, yes. I am an expert.
Hey, welcome back, Bonni. Bonni, every time I talk to someone, a community member, they always say hi to Bonni. So, hi.
Hello.
Glad to have you back. And so this is an important topic because we are all wrong. And what do we do when we're wrong? And as I was thinking about this topic this week, I got back to thinking about Dale Carnegie's advice back in his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And he said almost 100 years ago when the book was published, when you're wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically. Boy, that is not human nature, is it, Bonni?
I think for most people, it's not. So when I read this quote, the first thing I think of is for myself that it can be difficult, and it kind of depends on the climate. It depends on the organization and the level of trust there. But certainly, I mean, when we look at even just our own relationship, we certainly can laugh at ourselves. Fortunately, we still can keep our sense of humor, but even how difficult in our trusting relationship it can be sometimes to admit when we're wrong, or even to identify what does it mean to be right? What does it mean to be wrong? But the other thing I think about too is that I think that he wrote from a perspective of being a male Caucasian, and that sometimes I see people of color, I see women in particular, a lot of the negotiation research shows that sometimes women can be overly apologetic. So the quote says, when you're wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically, but I wouldn't want people to hear that and think, oh, I should go around apologizing all the time, and that's going to make me respected. So I think it's really, there's a lot of richness there and a lot for us to unpack today. Yeah,
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think that part of what you could take away from this conversation is just go around and telling people all the things you've ever done wrong. And that's not necessarily the right answer for a whole bunch of reasons. Branding, marketing yourself, your, setting up the tone for how you show up in the organization. You said something here a minute ago, which I think we should go back to for a second, which is the difference between right and wrong. And maybe we should say something about what it means to be right, first of all. And I think you might have some thoughts on this, on some of the different ways we can think about rightness and truth.
Well, a lot of times people will talk about, I'm right. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the way that they perceive things. I remember I was teaching a class once, and it was an online class and not particularly designed well. I did not design it, so you can see me throwing whoever designed it under the bus here. But I was speaking over the phone with one of the women in the class, and she was talking about another person in her group had attacked her and how terrible it was that she would just insult her in such a way in front of all of those people that they were working on some kind of a collaborative group writing project. Mm-hmm. And that she would just embarrass her so much. And when I went and looked, and because I had done my homework beforehand and had seen the different communication styles. And so this woman was definitely on more of the passive, indirect style of communication. And the woman who had been commenting on her writing was much more direct and assertive. I would not even call her aggressive. I would say assertive. But with our writing, things like that, when we present, when we create in the workplace, a lot of times we can forget that we're separate and apart from that if we choose to be, that it can be something that can sit out there for people to really have feedback on. So at any rate, she said to me, I'll never forget, there's only one way to see this. There's only, and I thought, oh my goodness gracious, you're talking about something someone has written. You didn't even hear her voice.
Yeah.
You don't even have that much of a relationship. I think you've known each other all of 2 weeks now in this class.
That's awesome.
And you're convinced that there's only one way of perceiving what she was trying to communicate there. She was trying to take you down in front of all these people. And so I think back to, and I've heard variations on this, so different authors have written similar things, but the idea that there really are 4 kinds of truth out there. There's my truth. So there's the way that I perceive something, and that ties up a lot in when we think that we're right.
For sure.
And then there's your truth. And, many great leadership authors have talked about trying to see things from the other person's point of view.
Dale Carnegie himself, in fact.
Or my favorite is Jack Handy, who is the satire on Saturday Night Live, who said you should walk a mile in somebody else's shoes because at least then you'll be a mile away and you'll have their shoes. I'm loosely paraphrasing there.
Great leadership wisdom in Saturday Night Live. Yes, indeed.
So anyway, I want that ability to see your truth and to hear your truth and to recognize that it could be quite different than my truth. And then the goal for us together, the third kind of truth, is for us to create some kind of a shared truth together. And then there's the truth. And hardly ever do we ever actually get to see the real fact-based, because so much of what happens when we work together with others to accomplish goals is we kind of can get in our own way because, we perceive things so different. We really are very different as people.
That's interesting. So we can come to an agreement about what the truth is, that shared truth, but then still be totally off the mark of what the actual truth or reality is. And I can think of times that's happened where 2 people have gotten on the same page, or I've gotten on the same page with someone else, and then we find out later we're both really in the wrong. So
yeah, well, and I crack up too. Sometimes when we talk about budgeting, for listeners, we have our savings account. But what Dave and I do is break up that savings account in an Excel spreadsheet just into what we're saving for. So is it long-term wanting to save for our next vehicles? Because those are things that we don't like to do payments on. So we save up over long periods of time. Or for listeners that might remember, we're having a baby in February. So saving up for a baby and other types of, or taxes, house property taxes. Yep. And so we laugh because we'll have these big discussions about which bucket is this cash going to either come from if we're having a shortfall, or is an excess of cash going to go. And it's hysterical because both you and I are perfectly logical in understanding it's just a savings account. It doesn't really actually matter which bucket it goes on the spreadsheet. It's not actually connected to the account. But it's funny that has created for us a shared truth, which helps us get centered on what the long-term purpose might be for the cash that we are saving.
Yeah, it's a great example. I hadn't even thought of that. But it really does. Even if we don't ultimately do what we say we're going to do with that money, just getting in the same place is really, really helpful. And yet, as leaders, I know a lot of the times, at least I can speak for myself, there's many times that I've made bad calls on things and really been wrong about something. And it is, I think there's kind of 2 general paths to follow. One is to go down the path of, yes, I was wrong and let me correct it and admit it, or let me try to cover it up a little bit and maybe nobody will notice. And I was, when we were thinking about planning the show, I was thinking about a situation, Bonni, that happened with one of our clients. It was about 2 or 3 years ago. One of our clients had approached us with this great idea to come and to have a kind of a community within the organization that would be a community group of all the people that had done work with us. And so it was this great kind of community of practice and get a whole bunch of people together. And it was a Dale Carnegie group. And when I first heard about the idea, I thought it was a really, really cool idea. And I didn't think it would ever work. I didn't think that the restrictions that we had working with that client, I didn't think the brand name, I just, there was, for a whole bunch of reasons, the logistics just weren't going to work. And so while I was willing to help them out, I sort of said, I just don't think this is going to happen. And they went through this whole process to get it approved. And I was helpful, but I wasn't super enthusiastic about it working out. And it turned out that it turned into something even bigger than I ever imagined it would be. And now we joke about it. And anytime I talk with people about putting it together, I say, I was completely wrong. I mean, it goes to show you what I know. Here I thought for sure this was never going to work, never going to happen, didn't put forth a lot of effort into it. And it turns out I was completely wrong about it. So now almost always, anytime that topic comes up or we talk about being wrong about something or we're doing advanced planning, I'll bring that up just as an example. For one, just because I think it's funny and I think it provides some humor, but also I really am trying to be intentional about showing that, I don't make the right call all the time. And I want to, when I do make a bad call, I want people to know that I'm human and that I make mistakes. And I think that that's something that, in that situation was a little easier because it was not as high visibility thing as other things have been. But I think that was really helpful. And as a result has helped that organization to continue to move forward because we can joke about it and have fun with it and move on and do some really productive things with it, which I think is one of the things that gets in the way if we are stubborn and we try to hang on to being right about something when really we aren't right about something.
Our pride can get so much in the way. And of course, one of the things is, why is it so hard for us to admit when we're wrong? Why is it so hard to follow this advice from Dale Carnegie? And one of the things when we talk about what does it mean to be right is that I think that a lot of times people think of that as the logic that, you've input some different variables and then it's like math, there's the answer. And so it has to be right because I'm right. And so it's this view that is very black and white. And one of the problems is that people listening to this show, and you and I, Dave, are in leadership roles. And the world does not work that way. Most of us are working through other human beings and very complex. And what happens is they talk about the quality of a decision, the quality of that outcome, what makes for an effective decision. And the only variable in that equation is not the logic or the rational decision being made. So it's not that we can just put in the facts and out comes a nice effective decision. The challenge here is that people are going to be involved in executing on that decision. And so the acceptance that people have of the way that you're trying to influence them toward is going to be a factor in overall the quality of the decisions that get made and just how right you actually wind up being in the long run. Yeah,
for sure. It's funny. I think so much of my work, and I know yours too, is so many gray zones and different shades of gray. And I really sometimes admire and I'm jealous of some of my technical clients of how a lot of their work is very black and white. The number adds up or it doesn't. The test worked or it didn't. We passed this milestone or we didn't. The code completed the operation and we made the delivery or it didn't. And at the same time, those are some of the clients that I work with that often struggle with those the admitting when they're wrong and the people side of leadership, because that gray zone sometimes is hard to manage because it's not just about the logic, and that's not the only thing that goes through it. And I think that this is, if you think about the best manager you've ever had, and whenever I'm coaching people, we always come back to this at some point. We talk about what's the best manager you've ever had. Think about that person. Think what they did well. How did they handle situations when they were wrong about something? And almost always, people will say, well, that person was willing to admit when they were wrong. They were willing to be human. Yes, they made very good decisions most of the time, but they were also willing to admit when they were wrong, and they were authentic, and they were willing to say, yeah, I messed up on something. And that overall really actually helped increase their credibility as someone that they felt comfortable being led by. And I think that brings us to, some of the reasons that really as leaders, not only, I think, is it the right thing to do to admit when we're wrong, if that makes sense, but there's some real benefits to doing that too. And it's not just because it's the right thing to do or it's the ethical thing to do, which of course it is, but what are the real benefits to doing that? And I think one of them for sure is that if you are willing to admit when you're truly wrong about something, is that you are able to advance immediate progress on organizational goals.
Absolutely. It can propel, well, it in and of itself can help you avoid the speed bumps along the way. Mm-hmm. Because inevitably we're going to be wrong along the way. And so if we can quickly do that emphatically and quickly, then we can keep moving. We don't get stuck.
Yeah. And it's one of those things too, that if you're wrong about something and it's apparent to everyone else, it's kind of like the emperor without the I totally messed up this. The emperor has no clothes.
Yes.
Emperor with a naked emperor.
Now you've messed me up, but yes. I think everyone knows the story.
Everyone knows the story.
If you don't know the story, look up.
The
emperor has no clothes, but probably maybe just on Amazon.
Don't Google naked. Don't Google naked emperor.
Yes, we would advise against that.
But I can think of an organization.
It's a family-friendly show.
Yes, it is. G-rated. I can think of a organization I'm working with right now where there's a manager who is wrong about something, and it's kind of apparent to everyone else in the organization, but it's not really apparent to the manager yet. And they haven't, or if it is apparent to them, they haven't really talked about it openly. And as a result, no one's willing to touch it. Mm-hmm. No one's willing to broach the subject. And unfortunately, it's keeping the organization from moving forward because nobody wants to point out that the manager's wrong. And no sane person is going to do that, from an organizational politics standpoint. And most people perceive that to be a pretty career limiting move.
We had a new leader take over at the university where I work, and in a very senior position. And when he first got up and addressed the faculty, he said very openly, "I am going to be wrong. Just get ready." Because it was one of those things where people really celebrated him being in his new role. So it was he was making some jokes, but at the same time being serious about, hey, we're on our honeymoon here. And just so we're all clear, I'm going to be wrong. Mm. And then I loved it because he followed up with it and said, and I'm really going to say a lot of things that are going to lead you to think that there's no way I could possibly be wrong in my own mind. And I thought, how wonderful, because he really has a strong personality. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
I think leaders can be extremely effective when they have strong personalities and really struggle when they don't. So I am not criticizing him for that, but he has strong opinions and he will assert them. And in fact, his PhD is in social ethics or something like that. So he's used to having a good, healthy debate around topics from a very theoretical and philosophical approach. And so I just thought that was wonderful, kind of inviting people along the way to challenge him and to know that he'll challenge back. It's in his nature, but that doesn't mean he's not going to be wrong and that he doesn't want to hear it. Now that his work is not over from that one speech, because this is an ongoing thing that has to happen. And one of the other benefits that we've looked at, Dave, is the drive that it helps us toward innovation and more creativity when we're not so worried about being right all the time.
Yeah, and that's the thing is if you make a mistake in a management position and it's a public mistake and it's not talked about or acknowledged or it's kind of swept under the rug, more often than not, people notice that. They see it, even if it's not talked about. And the unintentional message then we send as a manager is, well, I didn't talk about it. It's not safe to talk about. So risk-taking in our organization isn't something that we should do. Isn't something that I value. Isn't something that I'm comfortable with. And so unfortunately, we really stifle innovation and creativity if we're not giving people that permission to be able to make a mistake or to be wrong on occasion. And so many organizations that are successful today have made so many mistakes and have been wrong about many things. And every successful organization makes mistakes in order to get to the right answer. And so if we're not willing to talk about when we're wrong and not willing that to be part of our culture, then we miss all that opportunity for people to be courageous to make a mistake.
Another of the benefits is that you can help inspire people to move forward. We've talked before on the show, although I don't think once is enough, I think, for even just you and I, Dave, if we're just sitting here having a conversation. The idea about admitting we're wrong is not just admitting we're wrong, but actually then talking about how we're going to avoid having something like that happen in the future. We've talked about it in context of making apologies.
Yeah. we did talk about that.
But the idea here would be that I don't just say, gosh, sorry that happened, I was wrong. But if it's something that could potentially come up again, if we can acknowledge the part that we played in it happening and what we're going to do differently in the future, if that's appropriate for the given situation, it kind of depends on what you're wrong about as to whether or not this fits. But that helps people not get tied up. Even if you do apologize, and even if you truly mean to say that you were wrong, part of then becoming right in the future is how it won't happen again.
Yeah, exactly. And this makes me think, as far as inspiring people to move forward, I think to leaders that I know that have admitted some of their mistakes that they've made. And I don't know about you, but I always find that really very motivating and I feel more connected to that person. I feel like they're more authentic when I've heard about something that didn't work for them in the past. It doesn't even need to be a current thing. I've heard people tell stories, 2, 3, 5, 10 years ago about something that they made a mistake on, which by the way I think is a really good thing in leadership to once in a while tell a story about something you didn't do well. And that gives people permission to really connect with you. But for me, I've always found that when I hear about someone's failures and then I see them doing something really successfully in a very successful position, having been very effective, I think to myself, wow, failure is part of the journey of being a good leader, of being a good manager. And if you don't fail once in a while, that you're probably not taking some courageous risks. You're probably not willing to push the envelope a little bit. And so I always find that really interesting when I hear from people, and I'm less impressed with people that kind of look just perfect on paper and always talk about their successes. I want to hear some of the things that didn't work for them, because then that makes me feel like I have permission to do some creative things and to take some risks and also to realize that leadership is not a perfect, A to Z course. It's not a straight line. It zigzags, just like climbing up a mountain and getting to the peak. There's the ups and downs and the valleys. And that's just such an important part of the journey of becoming an effective leader.
I'm thinking to a class that I'm teaching right now, we've had a number of guest speakers come in, and I'm thinking about the ones that really resonated with the students, and they're ones who were told stories of their careers in a very transparent way with some serious valleys, or even in one particular case of how their career had created some real pitfalls in his personal life, and just the power that was. I don't often see my 18 to 22 year olds more than midway through the semester as energized in a 3-hour afternoon class as I've been seeing lately. But it's amazing the kind of inspiration you can create for people when you are willing to tell stories of failure, mistakes in a very transparent and authentic way.
It's really interesting that we all, or I shouldn't say all of us, but a lot of us really resonate with that. And that's really captivating and interesting to listen to, because I don't know if it's just that isn't talked about as much, or most people aren't as authentic or transparent as they could be around that, or we just don't hear that in a lot of venues. It's just interesting that we really latch on to that, a lot of us, if we hear some of that. And again, don't go out and just tell people all week long of all the things you've done wrong necessarily, but being able to be transparent when the time's right about something that you haven't done effectively, particularly if someone that you manage is struggling with that same thing right now, and you can help them to along that path. I've always found that to be really, really helpful of being an effective leader. So, I think Dale Carnegie's advice here is good, is when you're wrong, and of course, when you're wrong, not just for any reason, but when you're wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically.
Thanks for having me talk about how wrong we both are.
Anytime.
Some of the time.
Every time I air a show, I'm always thinking in the back of my mind, okay, what's a good solid action item that you can take away and put into practice immediately so you can get results? So for all the obvious reasons, I don't think going out and messing up a whole bunch of stuff this week in order to tell people what you did wrong is the way to approach this. That said, I also don't think coaching others on this is probably the place to start either. This would be a harder topic to coach someone else on, of trying to get them to tell people about all the mistakes they've made. So here's what I would suggest, and this is actually the way I use this the most, is when I'm leading someone or managing them in a particular role, and they're struggling with something, or maybe they've even made a mistake or even a big mistake on something that I've had some experience with before, and actually I've made some of the similar mistakes before, or even made a worse mistake in taking on a new task or new responsibility, or maybe the person's handling a difficult issue with someone. And, I've had a similar situation where I handled something like that and it didn't go well for me. I find that one of the best ways to utilize this principle is, when you're wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically, is sometimes to talk about some things that you did wrong in the past when someone else is struggling with that. And I found that from a leadership standpoint, that can be really helpful to re-engage people, is to, when they hear that someone else who has, maybe is further along in their career or is in a leadership position, has struggled with something similar, and maybe even struggled with it more than they did, being able to talk about that, have some dialogue, I found is really helpful when people have done that with me. And I often find that I try to do that with others. So if they're struggling with something, I'll think about, what's a time that I struggle? Is there a time that I struggled with? Obviously, don't make one up if there isn't one, but is there a time I've struggled with this? And if there is, what's a story or an example that I can share with this person that helps them to realize that they're not in this, in this alone. And that's something that I found really, really helpful. So that'd be my call to action for you this week, is to find an opportunity, even if hopefully you don't mess it up this week. If you do, there's an opportunity, of course. But, if you find someone else struggling with something, think about what's a time you've struggled with that or something very similar to it. And how can, by you sharing some of your experience, perhaps help that person and keep them motivated to continue to move forward. Because, it's not about whether you're going to make mistakes in the things you're doing. We're all going to make mistakes. Man, I've got a whole list going from last week for myself. It's how you recover from the mistakes. It's how you work through the obstacles. And if we have the privilege to lead others, if we can help them to work through that faster, man, that's great for people. That's really great for people, and they don't feel like they're alone. And I think any day that we can do that for someone, that's a great day. So I'd love to hear your feedback as well. As I mentioned last week, I've set up a new page for all the feedback, all the ways to give feedback, rather than me giving you the phone number, email address, all that every week. So the easiest way to do that is go to coachingforleaders.com/feedback, and you can reach out with a common question or feedback for me or for the show or the community. And if you're looking for the show notes for this episode specifically, or want to comment on this episode specifically, that's at coachingforleaders.com/112. Speaking of which, Bonni and I did mention a previous podcast, and the title of that podcast was How Authentic Leaders Apologize. We had talked about the 3-step apology process in a past show. So if you have just been listening recently, that's a great show to go back and listen to. And when we mentioned that, I was thinking, gosh, that was probably 2 or 3 months ago we recorded it. Believe it or not, it's been more than a year. I couldn't believe it when I looked in the episode list here, but it's back in episode number 54. So the easiest way to get there is just go to coachingforleaders.com/54. So that's How Authentic Leaders Apologize. Bonni and I looked in detail those 3 steps of how to do that. So check that out. Hey, I am still looking for folks to chat with for just a few minutes. I'm doing this R&D project for my for the first course for the Coaching for Leaders community that's going to launch in early 2014, and I'd love to chat with you if you've been listening to this show for any length of time. And by that, I mean at least one episode. So, hey, you qualify already if you're listening to my voice. But if you've been a manager for less than 2 years or around that time frame, and you work for an organization that has at least 25 people in it, I'd love to chat with you, learn a little bit more about some of the experiences you've had in the last couple of years, or as you become a manager, because I am working on a course that's going to help with that. And I'm trying to get as much feedback as possible from folks so that I can really put together something that'll be very resourceful. So if that is of interest to you and you'd love to connect with me personally, I would just love to chat with you. Send me an email to feedback@coachingforleaders.com, and in the subject line, just put R&D, and I'll send you an email back with some more information. And if it works out to connect, I would love to connect with you. So please take a moment to do that if that's something that would be of interest to you. And I mentioned on last week's show as well that we're going to have an upcoming guest from the Lyft app, the founder of Lyft, which I spoke about on episode 109 is going to be here in just a couple weeks, and I'd love to find out if there's for those of you who may be using the app already, which I know a few of you in the community are, because you've connected with me, and thank you for those who have done that. But if that's something that you have an interest in, I would love to know about maybe a daily habit you'd like to take action on, because we'll put together a community plan for a new daily habit when the founder joins us here on the show in just another week or two. So if that sounds like something of interest to you, again, just drop me a line, coachingforleaders.com/feedback, and that's a great way to get in touch. And one final note here is a whole bunch of folks have joined the community and started listening to the show in the last month or so. The community has continued to grow. More and more people download the show every week. I'm really, frankly, really surprised at how many people have continually helped grow this audience. So thank you. If you have ever mentioned this show to someone else or shared this show with someone else, I so appreciate that. And for those of you who have connected recently, I just wanted to let you know I'm so glad to have you as part of the community, even if we haven't talked yet. And if there's anything I can do to help, let me know. And I'd really love to hear from you and just hear about your story, what attracted you to the show, and what, if anything, that I can do to be helpful in future episodes. And the best way to do that is just go to coachingforleaders.com, connect with me on whatever social media platform you like, Twitter, LinkedIn. I'd love to connect with you, or send me an email, and I'd love to get the conversation going and find out more about how I can serve you and start the dialogue. Hey, a huge thank you to Andar Molinari, Nanette Hall, and a whole bunch of other folks whose names I didn't get but subscribed to my weekly update this past week. I do publish an update each week that will give you a booster shot between the shows on how to lead better by giving you some advice and some action on improving your communications, human relations, or personal productivity. If you'd like to get in your inbox, just go to coachingforleaders.com/subscribe. Plus, you'll get access right away to a video overview I put together a while back and a downloadable guide on the 10 leadership books that will help you get better results from others. By the way, if you've listened to that before or grabbed the list and you've read one of those books, I'd love to hear from you too, and just learn what was helpful to you and how you used it, and just celebrate with you if you've had a great success. Hey, have a great week, everyone, and I'm looking forward to talking with you next Monday. Take care.